I never thought the worst day of my life would begin with my daughter offering to help me. That's the part that still gets me, even now. She called it help. She'd been calling a lot of things help lately, and I'd been too grateful to question any of it. My name is Ray Kowalski. I'm 68 years old, retired from 31 years with the City of Calgary's Water Infrastructure Department. And until that Tuesday in November, I believed I knew my daughter. I believed that whatever distance had grown between us since her mother passed, whatever awkwardness existed between me and her husband, we were still family. You don't question family. You take the calls, you accept the dinners, you pretend not to notice when they look at you like a problem that hasn't been solved yet. My daughter's name is Nadine. She's 41 now, married to a man named Brendan who sells commercial real estate and wears shoes that probably cost more than my truck payment. I've never said that out loud to anyone, but I thought it every time he shakes my hand and looks slightly past my shoulder, the way you look at something you're trying not to acknowledge. My wife Irene died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, fast and merciless. After she was gone, my world got very small, very quickly. The house felt like a museum. I sold it after 8 months, couldn't stand the echoes, and moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Inglewood, close enough to the Bow River that I could walk there mornings and feel like something in the world was still moving. Nadine helped me pack. She cried a little. That was the last time I felt like her father instead of her obligation. The call came on a Monday. Nadine sounded bright in that particular way she gets when she's rehearsed something. Dad, Brendan and I want to take you to Banff for a few days. Early Christmas, just the 3 of us, like old times. I almost said no. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe because she said like old times, and some part of me is still foolish enough to chase that. We hadn't spent time together, really together, since before Irene got sick, and something in Nadine's voice sounded like she meant it, like she was reaching across the distance we'd both let grow. Brendan will drive, she said. He's already booked the hotel. I should have noticed that she told me rather than asked me. The drive up the Trans-Canada was quiet. Brendan drove. Nadine sat up front with him. And I sat in the back of their Audi with my overnight bag and a sense that I was being transported somewhere rather than taken. They spoke to each other in that married couple shorthand that excludes everyone else. I watched the mountains rise and told myself I was reading too much into things. We stopped at the Banff bus terminal to drop something off, Brendan said. A file for a colleague. I'll be 2 minutes. I climbed out to stretch my legs. Nadine said she'd stay in the car. Brendan opened the trunk and I reached for my bag out of habit, thinking we'd arrived. He waved me off. Leave it, Dad. We're not here yet. This will only take a minute. So I left it. My bag, my phone charging in the backseat pocket, my wallet tucked into my jacket that I'd folded neatly on top of the bag because I was warm from the heated seats. Everything. The car pulled away before I finished reading the sign on the building in front of me. I stood there for longer than I should have. 10 minutes, then 20. A Parks Canada shuttle went by. A family with ski bags. A young couple arguing about which bus went to Lake Louise. I stood on that sidewalk in November, in a light jacket, without a phone or a dollar or any identification, and slowly understood what had happened. My daughter had driven me to Banff and left me there. The word that came first wasn't anger. It was something older and sadder than anger. It was something older and sadder than anger. It was the word I'd been afraid to use for 2 years whenever Nadine canceled dinners, or Brendan made excuses, or I realized I hadn't actually spoken to my grandson in 3 weeks because they'd switched to a new phone plan and somehow my number didn't transfer properly. That word was, of course, I walked into the bus terminal. A young woman behind the counter looked up. "Can I use your phone?" I asked. My daughter just drove away with mine. I didn't explain more than that. She handed me the desk phone without blinking. I dialed Nadine's number from memory. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I dialed again. Same thing. I stood there holding a stranger's phone, listening to my daughter's voice ask me to leave a message, and I couldn't think of a single word that was worth saying. The woman behind the counter, her name tag said Jess, found me a chair and a paper cup of coffee from the staff room. I told her not to worry. I told her my daughter was probably on her way back. She didn't believe me, and she was kind enough not to say so. An RCMP officer came by around noon doing a routine check of the terminal. He was young, maybe 30, with that careful politeness they train into officers when they're dealing with the elderly. He sat with me for a while, asked if there was anyone else I could call. I thought about it seriously. My brother lived in Thunder Bay. We talked at Christmas and birthdays and sometimes not even then. My friends from the department, most of them had moved to be closer to grandchildren in other provinces. My neighbor in Inglewood, Stu, was a good man, but I didn't know his number by heart. There's a shuttle to Calgary in 3 hours, the officer said carefully, but it's $42 and I don't carry that kind of cash on me to lend. I know, I said. I know. He offered to stay until the shuttle in case I changed my mind about filing a report. I told him I hadn't made up my mind about anything yet. After he left, I sat outside on a bench in the thin November sun because the terminal was getting busier and I didn't want to be the old man in the corner anymore. The mountains were extraordinary, the way they always are, and different and enormous and older than any grief I was sitting with. I'd brought Nadine here when she was 7. We'd hiked to Johnston Canyon, and she'd cried because she couldn't see a bear, and I'd told her bears were better spotted from a distance anyway. She'd laughed at that. I remembered her laugh. "Excuse me." The voice came from my left. A man, older than me, settled carefully onto the far end of the bench. He had white hair cut close to his head, a walking stick he clearly needed but seemed embarrassed by, and a wool overcoat that had been made by someone who knew what they were doing. He was the kind of old that looks dignified rather than diminished. "I noticed you've been sitting here a while," he said. "Not a question, just an observation." "I have," I said. He looked at the mountains the same way I had, without talking for a bit. I appreciated that. "Are you waiting for someone?" he finally asked. I was. "They already left." He turned to look at me then. Not with pity, which I'd had enough of that morning, but with something sharper and more careful. "You have no way home," he said. It wasn't a question either. He was perceptive in the way that some old men are, the ones who spent enough decades watching people that they can read a situation without being told. "My daughter," I said and then stopped. There aren't words that arrange themselves easily around that sentence. He nodded as if I'd said the whole thing. "My name is Lionel Marsh," he said. "I'm here from Calgary for a meeting that ended an hour ago and my driver isn't coming until 4. He paused, then seemed to decide something. "May I ask you something direct?" "You can try. If I offer to drive you back to Calgary and give you enough money to sort yourself out, would you be insulted?" I looked at him. "Probably not the right question," I said. He smiled at that. "Good answer." He settled his walking stick between his knees. "Here's my actual question. I need a favor in exchange. I'd been a city infrastructure worker for 3 decades. I knew when someone was about to ask me to help dig a ditch, and I knew when they were going to ask me to hold the shovel while they did something they weren't sure about." Lionel Marsh had the look of the second kind of man. "What kind of favor?" I asked. "The honest kind," he said. "Nothing illegal, nothing dishonest." He looked at his hands on top of the walking stick. "I have a dinner tonight at my home in Mount Royal. My son-in-law has invited himself and he's bringing my daughter and 2 of their associates. These are people who have been very interested in my affairs since my wife passed last spring, very attentive." He said the word like it had a smell. "I would like to have someone with me at that table who is not interested in anything. Someone I can present as an old friend who will simply sit and observe and tell me afterward what they saw. That's all." I stared at him. "That's all?" "That's genuinely all. I'm not asking you to lie about who you are. You be introduced as Ray, my friend from my years on the Calgary Parks Foundation board, which was a real board I sat on, and you could have been a real person on it. I never sat on any board, no. But you look like someone who could have." He said it simply. "You look like someone who worked hard and means what he says. That's what I need at my table tonight." His driver arrived at exactly 4. A dark blue Lexus, very clean. I stood up from that bench and looked at the mountains one more time, and I thought about the shuttle that cost $42, and I thought about my apartment in Inglewood and the key that was currently in Banff in the back of my daughter's husband's Audi. "What time's dinner?" I asked. 7, Lionel said. You'll have time to clean up at my house first. Tell me one thing, I said. Why me? There are cabs in this town. There are people you know. He thought about that seriously, which I respected. Because everyone I know wants something from me, he said. And you're the only person I've met today who hasn't asked for anything except to be left alone. That's a quality I've become very interested in. I got in the car. The drive to Calgary was 90 minutes. Lionel asked me questions the whole way, real ones, and he listened to the answers. What had I done for the city? Did I like the work? What did I miss about it? What did I think about the new LRT expansion? I hadn't talked that much in months. I'd forgotten it was something I could still do. His house in Mount Royal was exactly what you'd expect from a man who used the word attentive with that kind of contempt for the attentive. It was a 1930s character home on a double lot, the kind that gets called a heritage property, not because anyone declared it one officially, but because it had survived long enough to earn the word. Inside, a lot of wood, a lot of books, a dog that was very old and moved like he was remembering being fast. The dog's name was Hector. He sniffed my hand and went back to his spot by the radiator. I didn't earn this, by the way, Lionel said when he saw me looking at the bookshelves. My father-in-law built most of it. I married into something I didn't deserve, and I've spent 50 years trying to justify it. I liked him for saying that. He showed me to a guest room with a bathroom where someone had laid out a shaving kit and a flannel shirt that turned out to be my size. I stood under the hot water for longer than I should have and let myself feel the shape of the day. My daughter had driven me to Banff and left me. She had planned it. The invitation that sounded like reaching across a distance was really just a hand on my back guiding me out a door. I'd spent the last 4 years convincing myself the distance between us was my fault too, that I'd been too quiet after Irene died, too closed off, too much inside my own grief to be the father she needed. And some of that was probably true, but you don't leave someone at a bus terminal in November because they weren't emotionally available enough 4 years ago. You do that because you want them gone, and you didn't have the courage to say so. By the time I got downstairs, Lionel's house had a different feeling. The dining room table was set for 6. A woman around 60, who introduced herself as Kathleen, was moving efficiently between the kitchen and the dining room, with the authority of someone who had worked in that house for a long time. She looked at me without much expression and then, a few minutes later, told me quietly that the roast was elk, and asked if I had any allergies. I've been eating whatever's in front of me for 68 years, I told her. She almost smiled. Lionel's daughter, Sandra, arrived first with her husband, a man named Troy who had the firm handshake and aggressive eye contact of someone who'd read a book about confidence once and decided it was a personality. Behind them came 2 people introduced as associates, a woman named Colette and a man named Warren, both from what Troy described as their wealth advisory team. Their wealth advisory team at a family dinner. Sandra's face when she saw me was interesting. Not shock exactly, more like miscalculation. She'd walked in expecting a table set by a certain logic, and I was a variable she hadn't accounted for. "Ray," Lionel said warmly, standing to gesture toward me. "My oldest friend on the Parks Foundation. I don't think you've met my daughter's family." Sandra kissed her father's cheek and shook my hand with her eyes doing quick arithmetic. "We hadn't heard you were visiting," she said to Lionel. "It was a last-minute thing," Lionel said. "Ray was up in Banff and I needed the company. At our age, you don't wait for convenient timing." Troy steered the conversation toward investment restructuring before we'd finished the soup. I noticed Lionel watching him the way you watch something mechanical that might be about to break. Warren from the wealth advisory team had brought a folder. At a dinner table, a physical folder, which he set beside his bread plate like it belonged there. "So Ray," Troy said, pivoting to me with that same aggressive eye contact. "How did you and Lionel meet exactly?" "The Parks Foundation," I said. "Sometime in the mid-90s, we argued about whether to replant native species along Fish Creek or go with something lower maintenance. Lionel didn't miss a beat. I was wrong," he said pleasantly. "Ray was right. Native species the whole way." Troy smiled. He wasn't sure if he believed me, but he wasn't sure he didn't either, and that uncertainty made him careful. Colette leaned in. What do you do now, Ray? You mentioned retirement. I spent 30 years in water infrastructure for the city. I said it straight, no apology in it. Mostly underground systems, making sure the pipes didn't fail. She nodded in the way people nod when they filed information under irrelevant. Sandra was quieter than her husband. She watched her father more than she watched me, and there was something in her watching that I recognized from Nadine's face sometimes, a kind of frustrated tenderness, love that had curdled slightly from too much waiting for something that hadn't come. I felt sorry for her in a way I hadn't expected. After dinner, Troy followed Lionel to the study to discuss, as he put it, a few time-sensitive items. Sandra stayed at the table with me while Kathleen cleared. The two advisors drifted toward the living room with their phones. How long have you actually known my father? Sandra asked quietly. Since this afternoon, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. And that doesn't strike you as strange? Everything about today strikes me as strange, I said. Your father was the most normal part of it. She set down her wine. What happened today? So I told her. Not all of it, but enough. The phone call from my daughter, the car ride, the bus terminal, the bench. I told her about the mountains and Jess behind the counter and the RCMP officer who offered to stay. Sandra listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. I'm sorry, she said when I finished. That's a terrible thing. Yes, I said. It is. There was a silence. My father, she started, and then stopped. He's been very alone since Mum died, and I've been worried about him, but Troy thinks, and Colette and Warren have both said, that he's making decisions that are financially not in his best interest, that he needs structure, management. I looked at her. Has he asked for that? She didn't answer right away. He needs people around him, she finally said. He has Kathleen, I said. He has Hector. He invited a stranger home from a bus stop because he wanted someone at his dinner table who wasn't counting his square footage. That doesn't sound like a man who needs management. It sounds like a man who's lonely and knows exactly why. Sandra looked at her hands. Troy appeared in the doorway. They finished up quickly. I found out later from Lionel that he'd told Troy, politely but without room for discussion, that he was not restructuring anything before spring, that he'd be consulting an independent advisor of his own choosing, and that the folder could be left for him to read at his leisure. Troy was quiet the whole way to the front door. After they left, Lionel and I sat with tea in the living room, Hector between us on the rug. The house felt like itself again. Well, Lionel said, how'd we do? I told him what I'd seen. Troy's focus on the folder, the way Colette cataloged information, Sandra's ambivalence. I told him I thought his daughter wasn't greedy, just frightened, which was different. He should know the difference. He was quiet for a while. I know, he said. I'm not angry at her. I'm angry that she chose that man to be frightened alongside. He poured more tea. Stay the night, he said. I'd rather not be alone with all that still in the air. I stayed. The guest room had thick curtains and a wool blanket, and I slept better than I had in months, which told me something about what being heard does to the body. In the morning, Kathleen made eggs, and Lionel came downstairs in a plaid housecoat that made him look like a man who'd finally relaxed into his 80s. We ate without talking much. It was comfortable in the way that takes years to build between most people, and had somehow arrived overnight. What will you do about your daughter? He asked eventually. I don't know yet. I need to get home first. Figure out the lock. Get a new phone. He nodded. I'd like to propose something. He turned his tea mug in his hands. I've been considering adding a trustee to oversee the estate. Not Troy's team. Someone independent. Someone who comes at it from the outside and has no stake in the outcome. He looked at me. I'm not offering it to you. You're not qualified and neither of us would want that. I almost laughed. But I do want to pay you properly for last night. Not as charity, as consulting. A man who spent 30 years making sure the city's systems didn't fail underground knows something about the difference between structural integrity and decorative maintenance. I'm going to be making some decisions about this house and what comes after, and I'd like a conversation partner who doesn't have a folder. I thought about that. What would that look like? Coffee. Maybe once a week. You tell me what you see when you look at something. I tell you what I'm thinking. He shrugged. Old men talking. Nothing more dramatic than that. We shook on it. He also gave me a prepaid card with $500 on it, which he said was for the locksmith and the new phone and whatever else Nadine and Brendan had cost me in the practical sense. I tried to object. He talked over my objection with the ease of a man who'd been doing it for decades. Nadine called that afternoon. I had a new number by then, and she must have gotten it from my building. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought about what Lionel had said the night before, about the difference between anger and grief, and I picked up. Dad. Her voice was different than it had been in years. Smaller. Dad, I'd been trying to reach you. I need to explain. You don't need to, I said. I understand what you did. Please. She was crying. I could hear it. Brendan thought we both thought. If you had some time on your own to think, to realize that maybe the apartment, your situation, that you'd be more open to options. Options. He knows someone who does elder assessments, for placement. She said it fast. Like speed would soften it. We thought if you were alone for a bit, you'd realize you needed more support. More support, I said. You drove me to Banff in November and left me at a bus stop. For an elder assessment. I know, she said. I know how it sounds. I'm sorry. I was quiet for a while. I let her sit with the silence. Tell me something honestly, I said. Is this about me, or is it about the condo? She didn't answer, which was an answer. I'd been thinking about updating my will. I'd been thinking about it since Irene died and never quite gotten around to it. My estate wasn't much. The RRSP accounts, the TFSA, the small pension, and a condo that had gone up considerably in the 4 years since I bought it. Considerably enough, it turned out that Brendan had mentioned it at Christmas dinner 2 years ago in the way that people mention things they've already done the math on. I'm not ready to see you yet, I said. And I'm not ready to have the conversation you're trying to have, but I need you to hear something. She waited. I loved your mother, and I love you, I said. And what you did was one of the hardest things I've ever had to understand. I'm still understanding it. But I'm not disappearing. I'm not going into any elder assessment facility, and I'm not signing anything, and I'm not gone. I'm still here, and I'm still your father. And when I'm ready to talk to you about all of it, I will call you. Until then, please don't contact me. Dad, please. I'll call you, I said. I meant it. Goodbye, Nadine. I held the phone for a long time after I hung up. That week, I changed my will with a lawyer on 4th Street. I didn't do anything dramatic with it. I left Nadine what I'd always planned to leave her, maybe a little less. And I added some to a fund for my grandson's education that neither Nadine nor Brendan could touch until he was 22. I left a small amount to a low-income seniors housing society on 16th Avenue that I'd driven past 100 times and never thought much about until I sat on a bench in Banff and had some time to reconsider my assumptions. Lionel and I started meeting Tuesdays at a diner near his house. He ordered the same thing every week. 2 eggs over easy, brown toast, black coffee, no substitutions. I tried different things off the menu because I'd spent 30 years ordering the same lunch from the same food truck and I figured it was time. He told me about his wife, Evelyn, how she'd been the one who understood people, who could read a room in 30 seconds and tell him what everyone in it wanted and feared, how he'd spent 50 years relying on that skill and hadn't understood how much until she was gone and he was sitting across from Troy's folder, wondering why something felt wrong and not having the words for it. I told him about Irene, how she'd been the one who got Nadine, who spoke her language, translated for both of us. How after Irene died, the translation just stopped and Nadine and I had been standing on opposite sides of something saying words that didn't cross. Maybe that's why you didn't see it coming, Lionel said once. You weren't watching the same thing. Maybe. I still haven't figured out how to forgive Nadine completely. I'm not sure complete forgiveness is something you arrive at, or if it's something you practice, like the exercises my physiotherapist gives me for my hip. Not comfortable, not dramatic, just daily, until one day you notice you're moving a little better. She calls sometimes. I answer about half the time. Once, she called to tell me my grandson had lost his first tooth, and she sent a photo, a tiny gap in that enormous smile, and I cried after I hung up, but in the good way, the way that means something's still attached. 4 months after the bench in Banff, Lionel had a health event. Nothing catastrophic, but significant enough that Sandra spent 3 days at the house, and Troy didn't come at all, which told me things about both of them that I'd already suspected. I went over with soup that Kathleen accepted with approximately 1 degree more warmth than usual. While I was there, Sandra pulled me aside in the hallway. "He talks about you," she said. "He tells Kathleen you keep him honest." "Someone has to," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for last November. Whatever you said to him that night." "I only told him what I saw," I said, which was that his daughter wasn't his enemy. She looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded and went back to her father's room. Hector died and went back to her father's room. Hector died in February, which was hard. Lionel called me that morning and I came over and we sat in the kitchen without saying much, which was the right thing to do. He got another dog 3 months later, a younger one, a border collie mix that Kathleen named Agnes without consulting anyone, and that seemed to suit everyone. On a Tuesday in June, we were sitting at the diner. Lionel was reading something on his phone with the careful attention of a man who still didn't entirely trust the technology but wasn't going to admit it. I was looking out the window at the street, at the ordinary Tuesday morning of it, people walking dogs, a kid on a skateboard, a woman unloading flowers from a van for the shop across the way. I thought about the bench in Banff, the particular quality of the November light, Jess behind the counter with her paper cup of coffee. The mountains that had been there long before any of us and would stay long after. "You know what I keep coming back to?" I said. Lionel looked up. "You were sitting on that bench already when I got there. You'd been there a while. You didn't have to say anything to me." "No," he agreed. "I didn't have to. Why did you?" He thought about it seriously the way he always did. "Because you looked like someone in the middle of learning something important," he said. "And I found that those are the people worth talking to." I looked out the window again. Agnes was probably tearing something apart in Mount Royal. Nadine's son was missing a tooth and growing another one. Somewhere in Banff, the mountains were being their enormous and different selves. And somewhere in that same Banff, a young woman named Jess was handing a paper cup to someone who needed it. "Funny how the worst days have a way of introducing you to things," I said. Lionel picked up his coffee. Every single time he said,